The wood made a different sound with each impact. It wasn't like chopping firewood or knocking on a door. It had a wetter, denser sound, almost musical in its terrible uniqueness. I remember looking at my hands afterward, trembling, with the cane still firmly gripped between my fingers. That same cane he used to support himself around the house, feigning frailty while hiding his true nature. They say blood is thicker than water, but that night I discovered it's also darker when spilled across light hardwood flooring. In that moment, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt at peace, as if I had freed not only myself, but also her, my mother. The secrets I discovered in that house changed everything, and, try as I might, I cannot bring myself to regret what I did with that cane. My name is Michael Sanders. I'm 18 now. I'm sitting in this empty park because this is where I used to hide when things got tough at home. I've always liked the silence here on winter mornings when nobody else comes. The cold air cutting across my face reminds me I'm still alive, that I still feel something beyond emptiness. Today I left the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center, where I spent the last 2 years. 2 years paying for something that to me was merely justice. People in town look at me differently now. The gazes that follow me down the streets are heavy, laden with judgment. They whisper that I'm a monster who attacked a defenseless old man, a respected war veteran. Even some people I considered friends now cross the street to avoid walking on the same side as me. As if violence were contagious, as if they could see what I did marked on my skin. They don't know. Nobody knows what I found in that diary. Nobody understands what it means to grow up in a house where smiles hide scars too deep to be seen, where walls absorb screams no one else hears, where silence is the only protection left. I guess every family has its secrets, right? Small lies, indiscretions, shames hidden in locked closets. But some secrets are different. Some secrets are like poison. They eat away at you from inside, cell by cell, until nothing remains but pain and rage. That's what happened to me. The poison of 3 generations' secrets finally overflowed. I'll tell you everything from the beginning. Not to justify, because I don't even know if there's any justification for what I did. But so you understand. So someone finally understands that sometimes, when all doors are closed, when all cries for help are ignored, violence becomes the only language left. I know it seems strange to confess this to a camera, to people I've never seen, but maybe it's easier this way. Talking to strangers who can't interrupt me, who can't judge me face to face, who can simply listen to the end. If you're really paying attention to my story, I need you to like this video right now. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to receive future stories, and comment where you're watching from. I need to know who's really listening, who's trying to understand. This is important to me because the truth I'm about to reveal isn't something I can easily share. Each comment shows me I'm not alone with these thoughts, with this pain, that perhaps there are others out there living in houses like mine, needing to hear there's a way out, even if it was the one I chose. What I'm going to tell you next will completely change what you think you've understood so far. Nothing is as simple as it seems, especially when it comes to families, to violence that passes from generation to generation like a poisoned inheritance, to silences that scream louder than any word. I grew up in a yellow 2-story house at the end of a quiet street in the Oakwood neighborhood. One of those streets where everyone knows each other, where children play on the sidewalk until dusk and mothers call from windows when dinner is ready, where neighbors exchange recipes and gossip over well-kept fences, the kind of place that appears in margarine commercials, where everything seems perfect on the surface. Our family was small: me, my mother, and my maternal grandfather. My father was never present. According to my mother, he left before I was even born. A man without responsibility, she would say, with that distant look I didn't understand as a child. Better off without him. For a long time, I believed that story. Why wouldn't I? It was easier to imagine an absent father by choice than the truth I would discover years later. My mother, Helen Sanders, was always quiet. She worked as a nurse at the town hospital, double shifts. Sometimes when she came home, she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was beautiful, but in a sad way. She had large brown eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. And that smile, that smile that never reached her eyes, as if it were a mask she put on when necessary. I grew up accustomed to that smile, without understanding what it hid. She loved me, of that I'm certain. But it was a quiet love, almost desperate. She hugged me as if fearing I might disappear at any moment. She sang to me when she thought I was asleep. Lullabies her grandmother had taught her. In the good moments, those rare moments when it was just the two of us, she seemed almost happy, almost at peace. My grandfather, Robert Sanders, moved into our house when I was 8. Before that, I only saw him on special occasions, birthdays and holidays. He lived in another town, and his visits always left my mother tense, restless. At the time, I thought it was just the stress of having visitors. He was tall, with a rigid posture despite his age. White hair, always impeccably combed, well-trimmed beard. An ex-military man, from what I was told. He had several medals kept in a wooden box that he sometimes showed me, telling stories of bravery and courage. He had a presence that filled rooms. When he entered, the air seemed to get heavier, voices lower, movements more restrained. "Your grandfather is a hero," the neighbors would say. "A man of respect," teachers would comment. And I believed it, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was my grandfather, an important man in the community, respected by everyone. At first, everything seemed normal. He brought me presents, told me war stories that were probably made up, taught me to play chess on Sunday afternoons. He called me little man, told me I was the man of the house in my father's absence, that I needed to grow strong to protect my mother. I liked the attention. I liked feeling I had a male role model, someone to teach me how to be a man. But I remember exactly when things started to change. It was on a Wednesday afternoon coming back from school. I found my mother in the kitchen washing dishes. My grandfather was sitting at the table drinking coffee, nothing unusual. But when I entered, I noticed something different in her posture. How she shrank, how her movements were tense, almost robotic, how she avoided looking at him or at me. That's when I noticed the marks on her wrist, small purple bruises like fingers. When I asked about them, my grandfather answered before she could open her mouth. "Your mother is clumsy, always has been, tripped on the stairs last night." She just nodded without looking me in the eyes. It was the first time I felt that strange sensation in my stomach, as if something were deeply wrong, but I couldn't name what it was. At 10, I began to notice the tense silences during dinner. How my grandfather looked at my mother in a way that made me uncomfortable, even without understanding why. How she avoided his gaze, how her hands trembled when serving food, how she barely ate, just moved the food around on her plate. "Eat properly, Helen," he would say in that voice that didn't allow for argument. "You're looking like a scarecrow." And she obeyed, forcing herself to swallow each forkful, like a child trying to please a strict father. At night, I began to hear strange sounds coming from her room. I couldn't understand what it was. It seemed like crying sometimes. Other times, absolute silence, almost more disturbing than any sound. At 12, I realized my mother had started taking sleeping pills. A lot of pills. I found her once in the bathroom, staring at a row of orange bottles, as if they were salvation. When she noticed my presence, she quickly closed the cabinet, forcing that empty smile. "It's just to help me rest," she explained. "Work at the hospital is stressful." Sometimes I'd find her on the couch in the middle of the night, staring at nothing with red eyes. When I asked what had happened, she would just smile that empty smile and say everything was fine, that I should go back to bed, that it was too late for a boy to be awake. Nothing was fine. I began to realize this more and more clearly, even without being able to articulate what was wrong. My grandfather grew older, more physically frail. At 75, he started using a cane for support. It was dark, polished wood, with a silver handle shaped like an eagle's head. He kept it always within reach, like an extension of his body, like a scepter, a symbol of authority. Even so, his presence remained heavy, oppressive. The cane didn't diminish his power. Somehow it amplified it. At school, I started having problems. Fights with classmates, low grades, difficulty concentrating. The teachers called my mother, who showed up with deep shadows under her eyes and that same empty smile, wearing long-sleeved blouses, even on the hottest days. "He's just going through a phase," she would tell the teachers. "It's hard growing up without a father." But it wasn't a phase. It was a response to what I felt without being able to name. It was the weight of that house, that silence, those looks. It was the constant feeling that something terrible was happening right under my nose, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to talk to her a few times. "Mom, you seem sad. Is it because of Grandpa? Does he hurt you?" She always deflected the subject with a mix of fear and irritation. "Don't be silly, Michael. Your grandfather takes care of us. He gave us a roof when we had nothing. We should be grateful." Gratitude. That was the word she always used. As if we owed him something. As if his presence were a favor, not a right. As if anything he did was acceptable because of this imaginary debt. At 13, I began to observe more attentively the dynamics between them. How he controlled everything. The money, the decisions, even what we ate for dinner. How my mother, a grown woman, asked permission to go out, to buy clothes, to visit a friend. How her entire body tensed when he entered the same room. At 15, I tried to seek help. I spoke with a counselor at school about how things were strange at home. About how my mother seemed like a ghost. About how my grandfather controlled everything. About the marks I sometimes saw on her arms. About the pills. About the night crying. The counselor listened to me with a serious expression, taking notes. She promised to investigate, said she would talk to social services. For a brief moment, I felt hope. That same afternoon, the counselor called our house. When I got home from school, my grandfather was waiting for me in the living room, sitting in his favorite armchair, the cane supported between his knees. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to the sofa in front of him. I obeyed, feeling my stomach sink. "I received an interesting call today," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "About you making up stories at school about our family." "I didn't make anything up," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. He struck his cane on the floor, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't lie to me, boy, never to me." Then he called me for a man-to-man talk. He explained with that controlled voice that was almost more frightening than shouting. How I was being ungrateful, how he had taken in me and my mother when no one else wanted us, how I was embarrassing the family with my fantasies. "Men solve their problems within the family," he said with that voice that didn't allow for argument. "Never embarrass your mother like this again, understood?" I understood. I understood that no one would come to help us, that people only saw what they wanted to see. A dedicated grandfather, a normal family, perhaps with some problems, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that warranted intervention. After that, I stopped trying to seek help. I began to isolate myself. I spent less and less time at home, stayed at the library until closing, slept at friends' houses when possible. I began to wonder if it was all in my head, if I was imagining problems where none existed, if I was the problem. But then, at 16, I noticed the marks on my mother's arms. They weren't small bruises like before, they were more visible, more violent marks. She started wearing only long-sleeved clothes, even in the hottest summer our town had ever seen. When I asked about this, she said they were work accidents, that caring for patients sometimes left marks. "Some patients get agitated," she explained, pulling her sleeve down. "It's normal in nursing." But I didn't believe these stories anymore. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see what was happening. That's when I started observing more carefully, listening through the walls, noticing the patterns, like how my grandfather called my mother to help him with something in his room, and how she came back different, quieter, more dead inside. How she took long showers afterward, scrubbing her skin until it was red, as if trying to clean off something more than dirt. I began having nightmares. I dreamed of screams muffled by pillows, of locked doors I couldn't open no matter how hard I tried. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing. Something was very wrong in that house, and I was becoming more and more aware of it. At that time, I started thinking about running away, about convincing my mother to run away with me. But where? With what money? My grandfather controlled everything, bank accounts, documents, even who could or couldn't visit our house. And besides that, he had contacts, friends in the police, in the courts, in City Hall. He always said this as a veiled threat. In this country, a man with my connections always finds what he's looking for. So I stayed and watched, and I felt the anger grow inside me day after day, night after night. A silent anger that I kept as a secret, because in that house, we all learned to keep secrets. I started doing small acts of rebellion. I came home late from school, talked back when he criticized me, small things, nothing that justified an extreme reaction, but enough to divert some of his attention from my mother to me, to give her moments of respite, however brief. He retaliated, of course, cut my allowance, forbade me from going out with friends. Once, when I responded in a particularly acidic way during dinner, he slapped me hard enough to leave the mark of his fingers on my face for days. My mother just watched in silence, eyes down, hands trembling slightly. "Your grandfather only wants the best for you," she said later, applying ice to my face. "He had a difficult upbringing. He doesn't know how to express affection in any other way." Affection. As if there were any affection in that house. I began to wonder about my father, the man I never knew. I began to dream that he would come back one day, that he would take us away from there. A childish fantasy, I know. But sometimes fantasies are all we have. It was during the summer of my 17th year that things started to become unbearable. My mother was getting thinner, more absent, her body present but her mind far away, as if she had found a way to escape without really leaving. She was taking more pills, not just for sleeping now, but during the day too. Colorful pills that left her with a glazed look, slurred speech. Sometimes she spent entire days in bed, calling herself sick. My grandfather told everyone she had nervous problems, that she was fragile like her mother. He took over calling the hospital, explaining her absences, keeping up appearances. Her mother, my grandmother, a woman I never knew, who died young in circumstances that no one ever properly explained. Accident, they would say vaguely. When I asked for details, my grandfather would close his expression. "Some stories aren't for children," he would say, even when I was no longer a child. That summer, I started working part-time at a mechanic's shop in the neighborhood. I needed to get out of that house, breathe air that wasn't heavy with tension and fear. And secretly, I began saving money. Not much, just enough to one day maybe have an escape option. It was also that summer when I met Lucy, a new girl in the neighborhood. She had green eyes that seemed to see through you, and an easy smile that was the opposite of my mother's forced smile. We started talking, riding bikes together, watching the sunset at the park. For the first time, I felt something close to happiness. My grandfather didn't like her. "That girl has a defiant look," he commented once when he saw her waiting for me at the gate. Not the type of suitable company. But for the first time, I ignored his opinions. I kept seeing Lucy, even if in secret. She became my refuge, the only person with whom I could be just a normal teenager, not the keeper of terrible secrets. One day I came home early from work. The house was quiet, but I heard sounds coming from my mother's room. They weren't shouts. They were worse than shouts. They were muffled pleas interrupted by sobs. "Please, Father, no more, please." Her voice was so small, so broken, like the voice of a child, not a grown woman. I froze in the hallway, not knowing what to do. 17 years old, and I still felt as powerless as a child. I wanted to break down the door, confront him, do something, but fear paralyzed me. Fear of him, of what he might do, fear of what I might discover. I turned around and left the house. I ran until I was out of breath. I went to this same park where I'm sitting now and sat on this same bench. I stayed here for hours, staring at nothing, feeling something inside me breaking. When I returned home that night, my mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing had happened, cutting vegetables with mechanical precision, her face void of expression. But there was something different. Her eyes were emptier than ever, as if something had finally gone out in her. "Mom," I called. She didn't respond immediately. I called again, louder. When she finally looked at me, she seemed not to recognize me for a second. "We need to get out of here," I said quietly, so my grandfather wouldn't hear from his room. "He's hurting you, I know." She dropped the knife she was holding. The metallic sound seemed deafening in the kitchen silence. "Never say that again," she whispered with an intensity I had never seen before. "Never. You don't understand. You can't understand." "Then help me understand," I pleaded, holding her arms, feeling how thin they were, almost too fragile to bear my touch. "Please, Mom, we can't keep living like this." She came closer to me, looked around as if afraid the walls had ears, and held my face between her hands. For the first time in years, her gaze seemed really focused. "Some things are better not knowing, Michael," she said with a trembling voice. "Some things destroy those who know. Promise me you'll let this go. Promise." I promised, but I didn't keep it. That same night, I waited for everyone to sleep. I heard my grandfather take his heart medication. I heard his cough, his heavy footsteps to the bedroom. I heard the silence that finally took over the house, and then I started searching. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew there was something, some hidden truth in that house, something that would explain the terror in my mother's eyes, the cruelty in my grandfather's behavior, something that would explain why we lived like this, why we stayed. I searched drawers, closets, old boxes in the attic. I found yellowed photos, old letters, documents of no apparent importance. I found my grandfather's military medals, certificates of merit, newspaper clippings about his deeds, the hero everyone believed he was. That's when I decided to search my mother's room. I entered silently, my heart beating so hard I feared she could hear it even in sleep. The moonlight came through the window, illuminating her face. Even in sleep, her expression wasn't peaceful. There was a tension there, as if not even in dreams could she escape. I began to search her drawers, trying not to make noise. Meticulously folded clothes, some simple jewelry, nothing revealing. Until I noticed something strange in the old dresser that stood in the corner of the room. The bottom of one of the drawers seemed not to fit perfectly. I carefully removed the clothes, examined more closely. There was a false bottom, a hiding place, and inside it a small diary with a faded red cover. It wasn't locked. It was as if she wanted it to be found eventually. I took the diary and silently left the room. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the cold tile floor. There, under the weak light of a flashlight, I began to read. The first pages were dated 25 years ago. The handwriting was clearly that of a child, rounded, irregular, with hearts dotting the I's. My mother, at 12 years old. "Dear Diary," the first entry began. "I got you as a gift from Teacher Isabel. She said everyone needs a place to keep their secrets, and I have many secrets to tell." The initial entries were what you'd expect from a 12-year-old girl. Comments about school, about friends, about a boy she thought was cute. Normal, everyday things. Until a few pages later when the tone changed. "Daddy came to my room again last night. He said he wanted to give me a goodnight kiss, but his kisses are different now. They make me feel strange, uncomfortable. I don't like when he touches me that way, but he says that's how fathers show love to their special daughters." My stomach turned. I kept reading, each page more disturbing than the last. I tried to tell Aunt Rose about what Daddy does. She said I have too much imagination, that I'm making up stories, that Daddy is a respected man, a hero, and that I should be ashamed of inventing these lies. She told him. Now he locks my bedroom door at night. Says it's to protect me from monsters, but the only monster is him. The entries continued detailing years of abuse, how it started with caresses that made her uncomfortable, how it evolved into something much worse, how it continued for years, how no one believed when she tried to tell. Today I took a test at the school nurse's office. I'm 2 weeks pregnant. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone. No one would believe me. No one ever believes. Pages ahead, another entry made me freeze. Daddy was furious when he found out about the baby. Said it's my fault that I seduced him. How can a father say this to his own daughter? He gave me 2 options. Get rid of the baby, or he'll tell everyone I got involved with boys from school, that I'm promiscuous, unstable, that I made up stories about him because I'm mentally ill. Who would believe me against him? No one. They never believe. The diary entries became more sparse after that. Weeks, sometimes months between one and another. The handwriting changed too, becoming more mature, more restrained. A brief note mentioned that she had decided to have the baby against his will, that she had run away to a friend's house in another town, that she was afraid but also hopeful. The baby was born today, a boy, Michael, so small, so perfect. When I look at him, I see only love, not the horror of how he was conceived. He is my chance to do something pure in this world, to create something good from so much evil. I will protect him with my life. He will never know the truth about his father. Never. The following pages told about the first years of my life, how she struggled to raise me alone, how she worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, how she did everything she could to give me a normal life, away from him. Michael turned 5 today. He's so intelligent, so kind. Sometimes I see traits of my father in him. The shape of his chin, the way he furrows his brow when concentrating. This scares me. I have nightmares where he becomes like my father, but then he smiles and all that fear disappears. He is not my father. He is himself, pure, good, everything I couldn't be. There was a gap of almost 3 years. Then, when the entries resumed, the tone was different, desperate. He found us. I don't know how, but he found us. He showed up at the school door when I was picking up Michael. Said he's sick, that he's sorry, that he wants to meet his grandson before he dies, as if he had any right. He threatened to tell Michael everything if I don't let him into our lives. What do? The last entry in the diary was from when I was 8, precisely the time when my grandfather came to live with us. I am betraying Michael by letting this man into our lives. I am betraying everything I promised. But what choice do I have? He threatened to take Michael from me. Said he has proof that I'm mentally unstable, that as a decorated military man, as an exemplary citizen, he would easily get custody, and he would succeed. In this world, men like him always win. So I let him in, and with that I let the monster back under my bed, back into my head, back into my life. Forgive me, Michael. One day perhaps you'll understand that everything I did was to protect you. The diary ended there. I closed it with trembling hands, feeling sick. The pieces fit together now. My absent father. The control my grandfather exerted over us, my mother's constant fear, the cycle that never ended. My grandfather wasn't just my grandfather. He was my father and my grandfather, the monster from my mother's nightmares, and now from mine too. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling a rage so intense that it seemed it would consume me from within. A different rage from anything I had felt before. Cold, calculated, patient. In the days that followed, I observed everything with new eyes. Every interaction between my mother and my grandfather, now laden with terrible meaning. Every time he called her, every time he touched her arm, every time he forced her to sit next to him on the sofa. It wasn't just the controlling behavior of an authoritarian father. It was the behavior of a predator who never abandoned his prey. I began to notice other details too. How he sometimes looked at me with a strange expression. How he commented that I was becoming a man. How he insisted we had the same strong blood. The disgust I felt in those moments was almost unbearable. I stopped going to school. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't pretend normalcy. I spent my days wandering around town or sitting in this same park, imagining ways to free us from that nightmare. I tried to talk to my mother one last time. I didn't mention the diary, but I tried to make her admit what was happening. If he's hurting you, we can go to the police, I said one night after he had already retired. She laughed, a bitter laugh without humor that seemed to tear her throat. Police? Your grandfather has friends in the police, has friends everywhere, always has. Why do you think no one ever helped me? Then let's run away. I have some money saved. We can go far away, change our names, start over. She held my hands between hers, her eyes full of tears that refused to fall. You don't understand, Michael. He would find us. He always finds. And next time, it would be worse. It was at that moment I realized that no one would come to save us, that any solution would have to come from me. The idea began to form in my mind, not all at once, but gradually, like drops of water slowly filling a glass until it overflows. I began to observe my grandfather's habits, his schedules, when he took his heart medication. 2 white pills, 1 blue, always at 9 p.m. When my mother left for work, night shifts on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. When he drank, almost every night, a glass of whiskey after dinner, sometimes more on weekends. I began to plan. One afternoon, I found my mother in the bathroom throwing up. I held her hair, gave her water. She was paler than ever, almost translucent under the fluorescent light. "What's wrong?" I asked, knowing she would lie. "Just a virus," she replied automatically. "It's going around the hospital, nothing to worry about." But I saw the pregnancy test in the trash, positive, and something inside me simply broke. Everything became extremely clear in that moment, as if all the fog of doubt and fear had been blown away by a strong wind. I knew what I needed to do to protect her, to protect the baby she was carrying, my brother, who would also be my uncle, to break this sick cycle once and for all. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window, watching the full moon illuminate the yard. The world kept turning out there. People lived their normal lives, while inside that house, we were trapped in a nightmare that had lasted generations. I thought of Lucy, of her easy smile, of how she saw beauty in simple things, the flight of a bird, the patterned clouds made in the sky. I thought of what it would be like to be able to live like that, without the weight of secrets, without constant fear. I thought of what it would be like to be able to introduce my mother to her, to see them talking, laughing together. A normal life, a life that seemed impossible as long as he existed. The next morning, I took my mother's diary and took it with me to work. During my break, I went to the police station. I asked to speak to someone about an abuse case. I showed the diary. I explained what was happening. The police officer who attended me, a middle-aged man with deep shadows under his eyes, thumbed through the diary with an impassive expression. When I finished my account, he closed the notebook and looked at me with what seemed to be pity. "Look, kid, these are very serious accusations. Your grandfather is Robert Sanders, the retired colonel, right?" When I nodded, he sighed. "I know your grandfather, a respected man, and you're here with a decades-old diary with no concrete proof, accusing him of, well, serious crimes." "I'm not making this up," I protested. "My mother is suffering now. Today he continues to abuse her, and now she's pregnant again. You need to do something." He leaned over the desk, lowering his voice. "I'll be honest with you. Even if we wanted to investigate, and I'm not saying we don't want to, it would be your word against his. And a judge will give more weight to the word of a decorated colonel than to a teenager with disciplinary problems at school." "And the diary?" I asked desperately. "Could have been written at any time. It's not proof of anything." He returned the notebook to me. "My advice: finish school, get a job, help your mother get out of this situation legally. If there is abuse happening now, she needs to be the one to report it. You understand?" I understood. I understood that the doors were closed, that the system was designed to protect men like my grandfather, that not even those who should help were willing to challenge the status quo. I left the police station feeling more alone than ever. I walked aimlessly around town for hours, the diary weighing in my pocket like a stone. When I finally returned home, I had made my decision. If justice wouldn't come through official channels, it would come by my hands. That night was different from others. I felt a strange calm enveloping me, as if I were observing everything from outside my own body. A peace that came from certainty, from the decision already made, from the knowledge that I would finally do something to change our situation. We ate dinner in silence, as always. My mother barely touched her food, moving rice from one side of the plate to the other with her fork. She was paler than normal, her eyes red from recent crying. My grandfather complained about the flavor, the temperature, everything, as always. "This meat is too dry," he said, pushing away the plate. "How many times do I have to tell you how I like my food, Helen?" "Sorry, Father," she murmured, collecting the plate. "I don't know why I'm still surprised," he continued, sipping his whiskey. You've always been incompetent in the kitchen. Incompetent in everything, actually. I saw her hands tremble slightly as she collected the dishes. I saw how she shrank under his words, each insult like a physical blow. I saw and felt that cold anger grow even more inside me. After dinner, my mother left for the night shift at the hospital. It was Wednesday, her regular shift. Before leaving, she hugged me tighter than normal, pressing me against herself as if afraid she might never see me again. "I love you, son," she said with watery eyes. "Never forget that." "I love you too, Mom," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "Everything will be all right, I promise." Something in my tone must have caught her attention, because she pulled back a little, looking at me intently. "Michael, what do you mean by that?" "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just that things will get better for both of us." She seemed to want to say something more, but my grandfather called her from the living room, irritated by the delay. She squeezed my hand one last time and left, leaving behind only the light scent of her cheap perfume. When she left, I was alone with my grandfather. He settled into his armchair in the living room, as he did every night with his wooden cane beside him. He turned on the TV, began watching some program, one of those talk shows where people shout at each other about politics. "Bring me another whiskey," he ordered without taking his eyes off the TV. I obeyed as I had for years. I poured the amber liquid into the crystal glass he so prized, one of the few valuable objects we owned. I placed the glass on the small table next to his armchair and stepped back. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the sofa. "I want to talk to you." I sat down tensely, wondering if somehow he had discovered about my visit to the police station. "Tomorrow I'm going to the bank," he began, taking a sip of whiskey. "I need to resolve some issues about my will." "Your will?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes, my will. I'm getting old, boy. I won't last forever." He gave a wry smile without humor. "Though sometimes it seems like I will," he added after a heavy silence. He continued after another sip. "I've been thinking, you're almost old enough for college. I have some contacts at the military academy. With my recommendation, you'd have a guaranteed place." "I don't want to go to the military academy," I replied automatically. He frowned. "I didn't ask what you want. I'm telling you what's going to happen." His tone allowed no argument. "It's time for you to become a real man, to follow the family tradition." The family tradition. As if our family had any tradition beyond secrets and pain. "What about Mom?" I asked. "Who will take care of her while I'm away?" He looked at me with those cold eyes, so similar to mine. "Your mother is not your responsibility. She's mine. Always has been. Always will be." There was something in his tone, a sick possessiveness that turned my stomach. At that moment, any doubt that might have existed vanished. I knew what I needed to do. "I'm going to bed," I said, standing up. "Good night." "Think about what I said," he replied, already turning his attention back to the TV. "The military academy will make a man of you." I went to my room and waited. I waited until I heard the sound of him swallowing his medication, the sound of the water glass being placed on the table. I waited until I heard the TV being turned off, his heavy footsteps down the hall, the bedroom door closing. I waited until the house was completely silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the living room wall. It was 11:23 at night when I went down the stairs slowly, each step a decision, each movement taking me somewhere from which there would be no return. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet, but I knew every treacherous board, every spot to avoid. Years of living in that house had taught me to move like a ghost. I entered the living room. Moonlight came through the half-open curtains, creating elongated shadows on the furniture. The cane was there, leaning beside the armchair, as always. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the polished wood in my hands. The eagle's head on the handle seemed to watch me with its silver eyes, judging me. I went back up the stairs, the cane firmly gripped. I stopped in front of his bedroom door. I could hear his heavy breathing inside, the slight snoring that indicated that the whiskey and medication had already taken effect. I turned the doorknob slowly, mentally thanking him for keeping the hinges well oiled. Another military habit he imposed on us. The room was dark, illuminated only by the weak light of the bedside lamp. He was there, lying on his back, his chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm. He seemed so harmless like that, sleeping, like any elderly man, not like the monster I knew he was. "Grandpa," I called in a voice that didn't sound like my own. He opened his eyes slowly, consciousness returning gradually. When he saw me standing by the bed holding the cane, irritation replaced the initial confusion. "What is it, kid? What are you doing in my room at this hour?" "I know what you did to my mother." There was a moment of silence, a moment when I saw something pass through his eyes, surprise, perhaps fear, but soon it was replaced by the usual contempt. "I don't know what you're talking about. Go back to your room before I lose my patience. I know she's pregnant again. Your daughter, my mother." He sat up in bed, now fully awake. His eyes narrowed, evaluating me like a predator assesses a potential threat. "Be careful what you say, boy. Very careful." "I read her diary," I continued, feeling my voice grow firmer. "I know everything. I know what you did to her when she was a child. I know you never stopped. I know that I am the result of that. I know that this baby is too." He stood up then, his posture rigid despite his age, his shoulders straight, like the military man he always was. Tall, imposing even in old age, that presence that had always intimidated me. To my surprise, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with an almost amused expression. "And what are you going to do?" he asked with a mocking smile. "Tell who? Who will believe you against me? A respected community elder against a troubled teenager?" "I already went to the police," I replied. "I showed them the diary." A shadow of concern passed over his face, but quickly disappeared. "And what did they say?" "Let me guess. That there isn't enough evidence, that it's my word against yours, that the diary could have been written at any time." He was right, of course. That's exactly what they had said. "I'm taking her away from here," I said, trying to sound confident. "We're leaving, far away from you." He laughed, a laugh that reverberated off the walls of the room. "Your mother will never leave. She never had the courage. She's weak, always has been, just like you." He took a step toward me, trying to intimidate me with his physical presence. "Now give me back my cane and go back to your room, and maybe I'll forget this insolence, or we'll have a serious problem, you and I." It was at that moment that something broke inside me. All the contained rage, all the fear, all the helplessness, it all transformed into action. I don't remember consciously moving. I just remember feeling the cane in my hands, raising it in the air. The first blow caught him by surprise, hit his shoulder, making him stagger backward. His eyes widened, not in pain, but in shock. Shock at seeing his grandson, the quiet and obedient boy, finally react. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, more surprised than frightened. I didn't answer. The second blow hit his legs, making him fall. He tried to get up, but he no longer had the agility of youth. The third blow hit his ribs. I heard a snap like a dry branch breaking. "Michael, stop," he ordered, raising his hands in defense. "Stop right now." But I couldn't stop. Each blow released years of trauma, of secrets, of pain. Each impact reverberating through the silent house like a scream I could never give. "This is for what you did to her," I said through clenched teeth as the cane came down again. "For all these years, for all the nights she cried, for every time you made her feel small, dirty, unworthy." At some point he stopped defending himself, stopped talking, stopped moving, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. It was as if something had taken possession of me, something stronger than my conscious will. The cane went up and down, up and down. The sound it made was wet now, different. The polished wood becoming stained, slippery in my hands. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. It seemed like an eternity and an instant, simultaneously. All I know is that eventually I stopped, panting, looking at what I had done. He was motionless on the floor, almost unrecognizable. The cane in my hands was stained. My hands, my face, my clothes, everything stained. The room smelled of iron and salt and something more primitive, more animalistic. I didn't feel remorse at that moment. I didn't feel anything beyond a strange relief, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my chest, as if I could breathe completely for the first time in my life. I let the cane fall beside him and stepped back. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back at me seemed to belong to a stranger. Wild eyes, tense features, red splatters contrasting with the paleness of my skin. I washed my hands, my face. The water in the drain turned red, then pink, then clear again. I changed clothes, putting the dirty ones in a plastic bag. I went back to his room, checked that he was still motionless. There was no pulse, no breathing, only silence. I sat in the living room and waited. I waited for my mother to return from the hospital. I waited for the sun to rise. I waited for the world to keep turning, even though mine had stopped that night. I didn't call the police. I didn't run away. I just waited, sitting on the sofa, staring at nothing. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace. The monster was dead. The cycle was broken. When my mother arrived hours later, I didn't need to say anything. She saw me sitting in the living room, saw my expression, saw the plastic bag with the clothes beside me. Her eyes widened in understanding. "Michael," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "What did you do?" "What no one else would," I replied simply. She ran up the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. I heard her muffled scream coming from the bedroom. A scream that contained horror, yes, but also something else. Something that sounded disturbingly like relief. When she returned to the living room, her face was pale, but her eyes were different, clearer somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from them too. She sat down beside me on the sofa, took my hands between hers. We stayed like that for a long time in silence. Finally, she spoke. "You know," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Yes," I replied. "I found your diary." She closed her eyes as if absorbing a blow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way. I'm sorry it had to come to this point." "There was no other way," I said. "I tried all the legal paths. No one would help us. No one would believe us." She nodded slowly, silent tears streaming down her face. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. I thought for a moment. "I'll call the police. I'll say it was a burglar who broke in, that he tried to rob us, that he attacked you, that I defended you." She shook her head. "No," she said with a firmness that surprised me. "I won't let you take the blame for something I should have prevented long ago." Then she did something I'll never forget. She took the cane, that same stained cane, and pressed it against her own hands, against her face, her clothes. "I'll say it was me," she declared, her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen in her. "I'll say he tried to force me again, and that this time I fought back, that I couldn't take it anymore." "Mom, no," I protested. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself like this." "It's not sacrifice, Michael, it's liberation." She caressed my face, leaving a slight red mark on my cheek. "You have your whole life ahead of you. I've already lived mine, and a large part of it was a nightmare I could never wake up from until now." Before I could protest more, she was already calling the police. Her voice on the phone was firm, controlled. She told a story about how her father, with whom she lived, had drunk too much, how he had tried to abuse her, as he had for years, how this time she had defended herself with his own cane. When the police arrived, she was sitting on the sofa, the cane still in her hands, stained red with his blood and her fingerprints. She repeated the same story with the same disturbing calmness. They asked me if I had seen anything. I said I was sleeping, that I woke up with the noise, that I came down and found my mother sitting like this on the sofa, that she told me what had happened, that I didn't know what to do, so I just sat next to her and waited. They seemed to believe us. Why wouldn't they? A woman with marks of recent abuse, an elderly man with a history of violence and alcoholism, a murder weapon with her fingerprints on it. Everything fit together perfectly, except for the diary. The diary that proved decades of abuse, the diary that I had hidden in my room under a loose floorboard, the diary that could give credibility to my mother's self-defense story. While the police investigated the scene, I went to my room and got the diary. I handed it to the detective who seemed to be in charge, explaining what it was, whose it was. "This proves it wasn't an isolated incident," I said. "This proves that he had been doing this for years." The detective thumbed through the diary with a grave expression, nodding slowly. "This changes a lot," he said finally. "Thank you for showing us this." They took my mother to the station to give a formal statement. They left me with a social worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, who asked me if I had relatives I could stay with. I said no, that it was just me and my mother. She nodded, making a note on her clipboard. That night, I slept at Lucy's house, whose parents offered to take me in when they heard what had happened. The news spread quickly through the small town. The war hero killed by his own daughter. The family scandal no one had imagined. The next day, I went to the police station. I wanted to see my mother, to know what was happening. The detective received me in his office, his expression serious. "Your mother is being charged with homicide," he said. "But given the circumstances, we're recommending that it be considered self-defense." "And the diary?" I asked. "Doesn't that prove she was a victim for years?" He hesitated, looking away. "The diary? Well, it seems it was misplaced during the process. We can't locate it." I felt my blood freeze. The diary missing. The only concrete proof of the prolonged abuse, of the horror that my mother lived through for decades, missing. "What do you mean, misplaced?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I gave it to you. It's proof that she was a victim for years." "Calm down, son," said the detective, raising his hands in an appeasing gesture. "We're investigating the disappearance. In the meantime, we have her testimony, the recent marks of abuse, the medical history that shows frequent emergency room visits for domestic accidents. It's a strong case, even without the diary." But it wasn't. Not really. Without the diary, it was just her word against the memory of a hero, a man respected by the community, a decorated military man, a dedicated father who raised his daughter alone after the mysterious death of his wife. I left the station feeling that the system had failed us once again, that the same forces that had protected my grandfather for decades continued to protect his memory even after his death. In the days that followed, the situation worsened. The story leaked to the local press. The newspapers didn't mention abuse. They talked about family tragedy, possible mental imbalance, suspicions about the true motive for the crime. Some even insinuated that my mother had killed my grandfather for money, for his military pension, for his house. The community was divided. Some believed the self-defense version. Others, the majority, defended the memory of Colonel Sanders, war hero and exemplary citizen. The neighbors who used to greet us now crossed the street to avoid meeting us. I received hostile looks at school, whispers in the hallways. "Son of the murderess," I heard someone mutter as I passed by. 2 weeks later, something even worse happened. My mother, who had been released to respond to the process in freedom, suffered a miscarriage. The stress, the doctors explained, the physical and emotional trauma. The body simply couldn't maintain the pregnancy. She stayed in the hospital for 3 days. When she returned home, she was even more fragile, more broken. She would sit for hours on the porch, staring at nothing, her hands absently caressing her now empty belly. It was during this time that I began to think that perhaps I had made a mistake. Not for having killed my grandfather, that I never regretted, but for having allowed my mother to take the blame. For not having realized that the system that had failed to protect her for decades would continue to fail. 1 month after the incident, I made a decision. On a Tuesday morning before going to school, I sat with my mother in the kitchen. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said determinedly. "I'm going to say it was me who killed him, that you're taking the blame to protect me." She looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much, suffered too much. "No, Michael," she said firmly. "I won't allow that." "But Mom, they don't believe you. They're distorting everything, making you seem crazy or greedy. Without the diary, we have no way to prove the abuse. If you confess, you'll go to prison, she interrupted. Maybe not for long being a minor, but you will. And that I cannot allow. And what if you're convicted? What if you go to prison in my place? She held my hands between hers, her eyes firm for the first time in weeks. Then I'll go, and each day in there will be freer than any day I spent in this house with him. Her voice was firm, determined. I won't let him destroy you too, Michael. He's already taken too much from me. My childhood, my youth, my chance at a normal life. He won't take my son too. I tried to argue more, but she was inflexible. And deep down, part of me knew she was right, that the guilt I would feel if she went to prison in my place would consume me as much as the hatred I felt for my grandfather. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, our life became a nightmare. We had to move. The neighbors practically drove us out with their ostracism and hostility. My mother lost her job at the hospital. Reorganization of personnel, they said, but we knew the real reason. I stopped going to school, unable to bear the looks, the whispers, the isolation. Lucy was the only one who remained by my side. She visited me at the new house, a small, cheap apartment on the outskirts of town. She brought food prepared by her mother, notes from the classes I was missing, news from the outside world that seemed increasingly distant. People will eventually forget, she would say, trying to console me. It will pass. But I knew it wouldn't pass. No, truly, some stains cannot be removed. Some wounds never completely heal. 1 week before the trial, when the situation seemed like it couldn't get worse, something unexpected happened. A box arrived by mail, no sender. Inside it, my mother's red diary, and with it, an anonymous note. Make good use of this. Not all police are corrupt. We never discovered who sent it. Some police officer with a conscience, perhaps, some station employee who found the misplaced diary and decided to do the right thing. We immediately took the diary to the lawyer assigned to defend my mother, a competent woman but overloaded with cases. She thumbed through the notebook with an increasingly grave expression. This changes everything, she said finally. With this, we can prove decades of abuse. We can transform a homicide case into self-defense, or at most privileged homicide due to violent emotion. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the system that had always failed us would finally do something right. The trial was brief, considering the gravity of the case. The diary was accepted as evidence despite the prosecution's protests. Experts confirmed that the handwriting was consistent over the years, that the paper and ink corresponded to the indicated times, that it couldn't have been recently forged. Doctors testified about my mother's frequent domestic accidents over the years. One of her former teachers came to testify, saying she had always suspected abuse but never had enough proof to report it. I testified too. I told about the environment at home, about the constant fear, about how my grandfather controlled every aspect of our lives. I omitted, of course, the fact that it was I who killed him. That version of the story had already been buried with him. When the jury retired to deliberate, my mother and I waited in the court's anteroom, hands intertwined, hearts racing. Lucy was there too, sitting on my other side, a comforting presence amidst the chaos. Whatever the outcome, my mother said softly, know that I don't regret protecting you, of finally telling the truth, of putting an end to all this. The jury returned after only 2 hours, a surprisingly short time for such a complex case. The verdict, not guilty, self-defense after years of documented abuse. There were murmurs in the court, looks of disbelief, of anger. My grandfather's friends, his former military colleagues, his defenders in the community, all seemed shocked by the result. But there were also sighs of relief, nods of approval. The few people who had believed in us from the beginning, who had seen beyond the war hero facade. We left the court to face a small crowd of reporters. My mother, normally so shy, so reserved, raised her head and spoke with surprising clarity. Today is not a victory just for me, but for all silenced victims, for all who suffer abuse inside their own homes at the hands of those who should protect them. May my story be a reminder. Silence only protects the abuser, never the victim. That night, back in our small apartment, I cried for the first time since my grandfather's death. Not for him, never for him, but for all that we had lost, for all that we could have been in other circumstances, for my mother, whose life had been stolen for decades, for myself, forced to grow up too soon, to see and do things no teenager should. 2 weeks later, when the dust began to settle, I noticed something different about my mother. She smiled more, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She began wearing colorful clothes, letting her hair down. Small changes, almost imperceptible to those who didn't know her well. But for me, they were like watching a flower finally blooming after an endless winter. It was when I thought we had finally turned the page, that we could begin to rebuild our lives, that the last blow came. One evening, returning from work at the mechanic's shop, I found 2 police officers at the door of our apartment. Their faces were grave, their postures tense. "Michael Sanders?" asked the older one. "Yes," I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach. "We need you to come with us to the station. We have some questions about the death of your grandfather, Robert Sanders." "Why? Wasn't the case closed?" "My mother was found innocent." "Yes, your mother was," replied the policeman, emphasizing, "your mother. But we've received new information that contradicts the testimony given in court." My heart raced. Someone knew? Someone had seen something, heard something, or simply put the pieces together. "What kind of information?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We prefer to discuss this at the station," he replied. "Are you going to accompany us voluntarily, or do we need a warrant?" I went voluntarily, of course. What choice did I have? On the way, I sent a message to Lucy, asking her to let my mother know, to tell her not to worry, that I would be back soon. Comforting lies that even I didn't believe. At the station, I was taken to an interrogation room. A small room with gray walls, a metal table in the center, 2 chairs. Like in the movies, I thought absently. The police officers left me waiting for almost an hour before entering. An intimidation tactic, probably. When they finally entered, they brought a thick folder. "Michael," began the older one sitting across from me, "I'll be direct with you. We have evidence that it wasn't your mother who killed your grandfather." I kept my face impassive, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What evidence?" He opened the folder, removed some photographs, photos of the crime scene, of the body, of the blood-stained cane. "The forensic experts reanalyzed these images," he explained. "The position of the body, the angle of the blows, the force necessary to cause the type of injuries observed. Everything indicates that the aggressor was taller and stronger than your mother. Someone like you, for example." I didn't respond. What could I say? "Furthermore," he continued, "we have the testimony of a neighbor who claims to have seen your mother arriving home at 6 a.m., long after the estimated time of death. He saw her from the garden where he was watering plants before sunrise, says she seemed shocked upon entering, as if she didn't know what she would find." I felt the blood draining from my face. The neighbor, old Mr. Ramirez, who suffered from insomnia and used to tend the garden at the strangest hours. I never thought he might have seen something. That's a mistake," I stammered. "My mother already confessed, has already been tried, has already been acquitted." "Yes, and we can't try her again for the same crime," agreed the policeman. "The principle of double jeopardy. But you were never accused or tried for anything." The other policeman, who until then had remained silent, leaned forward. "Michael, we understand why you did it, and we understand why your mother took the blame. But lying in a court of law is a crime. Obstruction of justice is a crime." "I want a lawyer," I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt. "Of course," replied the older policeman, leaning back in his chair. "It's your right. But think about this. If you confess now, voluntarily, this will be taken into consideration. You're a minor with no priors. And considering the circumstances, the documented abuse, the emotional state, it's likely you'll get a reduced sentence, maybe a few years in a juvenile rehabilitation center. And if I don't confess? Then we'll go to trial with the evidence we have, and believe me, it's substantial. In that case, even being a minor, you could get a much more severe sentence. and your mother will be charged with perjury, obstruction of justice, and falsification of evidence. My mother. Everything I did was to protect her, to free her, and now she could go to prison for trying to protect me. I want to talk to her, I said, before deciding anything. The police officers exchanged glances, considering the request. All right, the older one finally agreed. They left me alone again. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, the door opened and my mother entered, accompanied by a female police officer who positioned herself discreetly in the corner of the room. My mother seemed to have aged years in the few hours since I had seen her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she ran to hug me, pressing me against herself, as if afraid I might disappear. "Michael," she whispered, her voice choked. "My son." "Mom," I replied, feeling the tears I had contained for so long finally overflow. They know it was me." She pulled back a little, held my face between her hands, looking me in the eyes. "Listen to me carefully," she said with a fierce intensity. "You're not going to confess anything. I've already been tried and acquitted. They can't touch me now. But they can charge you with perjury, with obstruction. They can send you to prison anyway." She shook her head determinedly. "Let them try. I'll deny everything. I'll say I assumed the blame because I was in shock, because I wanted to protect my father's memory, because I was confused. I'll say anything except the truth. And if they have enough proof against me?" Her eyes filled with tears again. "Then we'll fight with all possible resources. I won't let him win, Michael. I won't let him, even dead, continue to destroy our lives." We talked for a few more minutes, planning what we would say, how we would defend ourselves. When the policewoman indicated that the time was up, my mother hugged me one last time. "Be strong," she whispered in my ear. "Remember who you are, not what you were forced to do, but who you really are." After she left, the police officers returned. They sat again across from me, expectant expressions. "So," asked the older one, "decided to cooperate?" I took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had happened, about the red diary that revealed the truth, about the blood-stained cane, about my mother's expression when she finally told her story to the world, about the baby she lost, my half-brother, who would also have been my uncle, about lives destroyed by silence, by fear, by impunity. "Yes," I finally replied. "I'll tell everything, but I want a written agreement. I want guarantees that my mother won't be prosecuted for anything related to this case." The younger policeman made a motion to protest, but the older one silenced him with a gesture. "I can consult the prosecutor," he said. "I can't promise anything, but given the history of the case, I think we can reach an agreement." And so, in that gray, cold room, I began to tell the true story of what happened that night. Every detail, every word exchanged, every blow struck. The truth I had kept for so long, that I had buried with my grandfather, that I had suffocated to protect my mother. When I finished, I felt a strange relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Not regret, never regret for what I did, but relief for finally telling the truth, for assuming responsibility for my actions. The agreement was finalized the next day. In exchange for my complete confession, my mother would not be charged with anything. And I, due to my age and the extraordinary circumstances, would serve 2 years in a juvenile rehabilitation center, followed by 3 years of probation. The judge who signed the sentence looked at me for a long time before banging the gavel. "Michael Sanders," he said, "the court recognizes the extreme circumstances that led to this act. It recognizes the documented abuse, the family trauma, the failure of institutions to protect you and your mother. This doesn't justify what you did, but it certainly contextualizes it. Use this time to reflect, to heal, to rebuild. Don't let this act define who you are or who you will become." Wise words, I suppose, but hard to follow when you spend 2 years in a rehabilitation center, surrounded by other young people whose lives were also marked by violence, by trauma, by pain. And so, here I am. First day of freedom. 18 years old, a whole life ahead of me, and a past I can never completely leave behind. The 2 years in the rehabilitation center were complicated. In the beginning, it was difficult, very difficult. The other inmates, when they discovered why I was there, reacted in various ways. Some avoided me as if violence were contagious. Others respected me in a distorted way, the boy who killed his own grandfather to protect his mother. Some even shared similar stories of abuse, of silence, of systems that failed to protect them. I had therapy, of course, lots of therapy, hours and hours talking about my grandfather, my mother, what happened that night, about anger and guilt and fear and relief, about how I felt knowing I was the fruit of a monstrous act, about how I secretly feared there might be something of him in me, some gene, some predisposition to violence, to evil. "You are not your grandfather," my therapist would repeat, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm voice. "You are not defined by how you were conceived or by what you were forced to do. You are defined by your choices from now on." Gradually, I began to believe this. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to continue, to get up each morning, to participate in activities, to make plans for the future. My mother visited me regularly. With each visit, she seemed a little more alive. The dark circles diminished. The smile appeared more frequently, that true smile that reached her eyes, which I hadn't known for so long. She cut her hair, began wearing brighter colors, occasionally wearing makeup. Small changes that signaled a greater internal transformation. She got a job in another town a few hours away. Not as a nurse, she wasn't ready to go back to that environment yet, but as a receptionist in a medical clinic. A simple job without the stress of the hospital, without the painful memories. She sold the house where we grew up, where everything happened. "I couldn't live there again," she explained. "Every corner holds a memory, a ghost." She bought a small apartment with the money from the sale, furnished it with new, colorful, luminous pieces. Nothing from the old house, nothing that could bring back those memories. Lucy also visited me, though less frequently. The distance, the time, the circumstances, everything conspired to gradually separate us. On her last visit a few months ago, she told me she had been accepted to a university in another state, that she would leave after graduation. Her eyes were excited when she talked about the future, the plans, the dreams. And although part of me felt a pang of sadness knowing that our paths would definitely separate, another part was happy for her, for having the chance at a normal life without the weight of my ghosts. At the center, I tried to continue my studies. It wasn't easy with all the interruptions, with everything that happened, but I managed to get my high school diploma with reasonable grades, not enough for a major university, but enough for a technical course, maybe something practical with which I can make a living. I learned some skills too, carpentry in the center's workshop. I discovered that I like working with wood. There's something therapeutic about transforming a rough piece of material into something useful, something beautiful, ironic perhaps, considering the role a wooden object played in my story. But perhaps it's appropriate too, a form of redemption, of re-signification. I made some friends or something close to it. Not deep, true friendships like the one I had with Lucy, but connections, companionship, shared moments that made the days more bearable. I learned some things in these 2 years. I learned that secrets have power, that silence can be a weapon as destructive as any cane, that sometimes monsters don't look like monsters. They look like loving grandfathers, like authority figures, like people who should protect us. I learned that justice and law don't always go hand in hand, that some crimes remain unpunished for generations, that sometimes healing only begins when someone has the courage to break the cycle. I learned about forgiveness, too. Not forgiveness for my grandfather, that will never come, nor should it. But forgiveness for myself, perhaps, for not having realized sooner, for not having acted differently, for having chosen violence when perhaps, just perhaps, there might have been another way. I learned about my mother, her strength, her resilience, her unconditional love. How despite all she suffered, she still managed to raise me with gentleness, with care. How even in the darkest moments she tried to protect me the best she could. "When you were born," she told me during a visit, "it was the first time I felt hope in many years. I looked at you, so small, so perfect, and I thought, this is my son, not his. my son whom I will love and protect with my life. Now, sitting in this park where I sought refuge so many times, I feel the weight of those lessons, those discoveries. I feel the weight of the choices I made and those that were made for me. I feel the weight of the lost years, the wasted opportunities, the postponed dreams. But I also feel a strange lightness. The lightness that comes from truth finally told, from a cycle finally broken, from a monster finally defeated. Soon I'll meet my mother at the train station. We're going to our new town, our new beginning. She's in therapy too. She's learning to live without fear, without guilt. We're learning together. I got a job at a woodworking shop thanks to a social reintegration program. It's nothing glamorous, but it's honest. It's a beginning, a brick in the construction of a new life. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing. I dream of that night, of the cane in my hands, of the sound it made with each impact. I dream of his eyes, wide with surprise, then pain, then empty. In those moments, I question everything. I question if I did the right thing, if there was another way, if I am really different from him. But then I remember the red diary, the words written in my mother's childish handwriting, describing horrors no child should know. I remember how she changed after his death, how she blossomed, how she freed herself. I remember that despite everything, we are here, survivors, not just existing, but beginning to truly live. The story doesn't end here, of course. I carry the scars of what happened, of what I discovered, of what I did. I carry the weight of the choices I made and those that were made for me. I carry my grandfather's shadow, the ghost of what he was, of what he did, of what he could have made me become. But I also carry my mother's light, her courage, her strength, her capacity to love even after so much suffering. I carry the lessons I learned painfully about truth, about justice, about healing. I carry hope, the hope that the future can be different, that cycles can be broken, that secrets can be brought to light, that wounds, even the deepest ones, can heal with time. If you've made it this far and understand what I've been through, please like this video, subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, hit the notification bell, and comment what time it is where you are now while watching this. It might seem strange, but each comment makes me feel less alone with this story. It makes me believe that maybe sharing this can help someone who is living in their own silence, their own secret. Because the truth is that there are many houses like mine, many families where abuse passes from generation to generation, many children trapped in cycles they didn't create. And maybe, just maybe, telling this story will help someone find the courage my mother couldn't find, the courage to speak up, to seek help, to leave before it's too late, before silence becomes violence. My name is Michael Sanders. This is my story. And today, for the first time in a long time, the future seems like a place where maybe I can belong.